Thank you very much, Dave. Dave said, my name's Martin Dean, Managing Director of Go Ahead's Regional Bus Division, and that encompasses brands such as Brighton and Hove, Plymouth City Bus, Southern Vectis and Purbeck Breezer, to name a few. There's a family fortune style prize for the one that can tell me at lunchtime which of those isn't a race-standing livery. There isn't actually, but just thought I'd say that. It's a great honour to be at the Album Conference. It's the first time in my long years in the industry that I've been here. When I joined Go Ahead in 2008 as a development director for Bus, my target was to increase our market share in the regions, which was languishing at 7%. And then we were PLC at the time. There was a lot of pressure to do something about that. So the legendary Keith Ludeman said to me, "You need to get out there and say, here comes Dino with his sack of cash and buy some bus companies." So I said to Philip Kirk, who was a member of Album, having worked for Hartlepool Corporation in his early days, "Can you get me to the Album Conference to make a few contacts?" He made some inquiries, but the polite message came back: "This is individual membership and you don't qualify as you've never belonged to a non-aligned business." So that's why this is my first ever appearance, because I hold a grudge. So the cash remained firmly in the sack, and I had to find other means to get to know various contacts. But it's brilliant to be here, and thank you for the invitation, particularly to Ben. Really, really pleased to be here. So those of you who were at the CPT conference earlier this year heard a fascinating presentation by David Leader, which quantified the costs of funding local bus and drew some conclusions on the affordability of various regulatory models. What I'm going to do today is a slightly less quantified presentation, which argues the way the industry is organised, indeed the way that it presents itself, is in response to the socio-economic conditions around it. And by this we have and will remain relevant, but most importantly can take a look into the future forecasts of prevailing socio-economic conditions to understand how it is that we can remain relevant. So it's a little bit of a sort of a thought-provoking intellectual presentation that I'm doing, so let's hope it feeds the mind for everybody so early in the morning. So the first slide talked about the three ages of deregulation. I've defined these as the age of entrepreneurialism, the second one, the age of consolidation, and the third one, the hybrid age. You can see my training as a historian coming out here. But more of these later. We're going to look into the future as well, as I mentioned. But it also prompts a question: what came before? As in, what came before the three ages of deregulation? Well, of course, it was the prehistoric age. This is the Diplodocus. This is the Asian Grantosaurus rex, both of which roamed the lush rainforests of the Fylde Peninsula. And of course, we had the Ptegosaurus. Do you remember the Ptegosaurus? But why the prehistoric age? Because compared to the way we run our businesses now, it seemed prehistoric. Networks were strictly controlled and highly regulated. Any changes had to be agreed with the traffic courts, presided over by ex-services top brass. And bus stops proclaimed that routes from out of town were only able to stop there to set down passengers only, to preserve the monopoly of the local municipal. Restrictive practices were not agreed in smoke-filled rooms, but openly agreed by bureaucrats acting in the interests of passengers. Code for jacking up prices and reducing network provision to combat what was considered to be the inevitable downward spiral caused by increasing car ownership and use. This seems odd in the context of today, but when you think of the 60s and 70s, society was very different. Boys dressed like their dads. I still do. There were only 3 television channels, none of which started before 2 p.m. And there was consensus that the state was all-embracing. The total war economy had only been stood down 15 years earlier, if you think of the start of the 1960s, at the beginning of the 1960s, and leftovers such as national service, food rationing and free school milk were still lingering. This is my point about how the makeup of our industry reflects the age that we're in. If the state was deciding how much food we could eat, it's no wonder it was also deciding where the buses should go and how much our customers should be paying for the privilege. So fast forward to the mid-1980s and the political consensus is broken. Thatcherism, with its reliance on the market, wins 3 terms of power and the Keynesian economic consensus is broken. The free market, privatisation and labour market flexibility become key themes. Helped by some legislative change, the industry responds, and with gusto. Big buses become small buses, but frequencies are increased to maintain capacity. Networks constantly evolve to reflect market conditions, prompted by the requirement to only give 42 days notice of a network change. New companies emerge, like the B-Line bus company in Manchester. Dave mentioned the custard yellow buses, but this just goes to show nothing's new. And intense competition is the order of the day. Companies strangely emerge and then disappear like a game of Cluedo with a blink of an eye, as the market is the ultimate decider of who obtains the share of patronage and revenue. Does anybody remember in the bottom left-hand corner there, Inverness Traction? They were there 1 minute and then they disappeared. And generally, the customers like the increased frequencies, the choice of operators and the innovative marketing. Some of the transport authorities found it difficult to cope with the constant change, but the innovation led to a shallowing of the passenger decline, which had been pretty steep since the 1950s heyday. The industry had embraced the new sentiment and remained relevant. So fast forward another 10 years and the existential change of the approach led to significant growth and societal change broadly, not just in the bus industry. There was no going back, and even the Labour Party embraced Thatcherite principles, but with a softer side to keep the left of the party on board. This, together with the first signs of environmental awareness, played out in the transportation field with a more interventionist approach. There was also wider recognition across society that leaving it to the market didn't always lead to the best outcomes. The Coalfield Communities Fund, if you remember that, to assist communities ravaged by pit closures, was instituted by the Conservatives before Blair came to power, just as an example of how leaving it to the market wasn't always seen as the best way forward. And so moving into phase 2 of the deregulation era, the industry responded. The increasing environmental awareness was incompatible with running basic minibuses, as Euro standards started to be applied for engine emissions. The market approach envisaged by deregulation didn't grow the market enough, we have to be honest about that, to create sustainable competition, and this, together with the need for investment, led to the consolidation which saw the big groups emerging and capturing huge market shares. The first signs of cooperation, rather than competition, emerged with the development of initiatives like Travel Line, and the 2000 Transport Act had the first signs of unravelling the principles of the 1986 Act, with clauses around integrated ticketing, partnerships, and the first mention of what became quality contracts in later Transport Acts. I'll just hasten to add that Spotter's book on the left-hand side isn't from my personal collection. The third age, to take us up to the present, I've termed the hybrid age, but I didn't mean in terms of propulsion systems, more that the industry is locked into a heavy-duty partnering model. Some commercial aspects remain, but the hybrid definition comes from the unavoidable fact that depending on time and location, at least 50% of our business's funding comes from third-party sources, namely government and local authorities, but not exclusively so. How has this happened? Well, environmental awareness has turned into a full-scale climate emergency. The global pandemic saw unprecedented amounts of money invested by the government to keep the industry running, and continual disparities in regional growth have led to clamours for increasing devolution. And in response to that, the industry has completed its metamorphosis from swashbuckling entrepreneurship to deep partnership, exemplified by this joint Zebra One bid in Oxford, which is by no means unique, but that was Stagecoach and Go Ahead, go back to the late 80s and early 1990s, locked in competition. Then we went into the smart zone ticketing concept, and now putting in joint bids to make sure that we have a combined electrification offer for the city of Oxford. And our key public service role during the pandemic in return for the 1.4 billion of CBSSG funding. These characteristics are difficult to unravel once applied, not that we necessarily want to. And as Dave alluded to, it's very clear that devolution is here to stay, and that mayors see buses as very public manifestations of their ability to influence the way people go about their lives and to influence more balanced economic growth in the regions that they represent. It's interesting to note, as an aside, that it was a Conservative government that really pushed forward mayors in the Mets because it saw regional growth as a way of enriching traditional Labour voters. So they started to vote Tory. It'd be interesting to see whether they still share those aspirations. So hopefully I've demonstrated our ability to adapt and be relevant. But what comes next in terms of society, economic, consumer trends, and how should we respond to them? So some of the things that I mentioned before about more environmental complexity, that is forecast to continue. Concern about environmental sustainability caused by extreme weather events is a key issue. Around 60% apparently of us in Western economies express concerns about the whole environmental issue. Growing of the population. Over 60s will double in the world population in the next 25 years. That amounts to another 2 billion people will start to be over 60, like my good self. Resource shortage, not just traditional fuels, but the clamour to try and find things like components for new technologies like lithium. Migration flows will continue from the global south as long as that disparity between the global south and the global north. The originator economy will develop. What do we mean by that? It's use of digital and artificial intelligence allows individuals to disrupt normal consumer products and retail supply chains. So, classic example of that is things like Uber in our transport industry, but Airbnb in the accommodation industry. And that sort of thing is going to only get even more intense. Economic stagnation, certainly in continental Europe, the increasing desire for regulation leading to low levels of economic growth. There is a disparity there which a lot of people don't seem to square the circle of, that need for more regulation, that sort of move away from the market can decide everything and will solve everything, to more regulation. But inevitably that will lead to lower levels of economic growth. And the superhuman economy, what do we mean by that? Good piece of jargon, but wider and more holistic approach to health. Mental health is something that has really emerged as a key issue in the past few years, but also spiritual, emotional and financial well-being. So they're some of the key themes, if you look into the future, that are predicted to be affecting society, the economy and politics going forward. So, moving on up to embrace the theme of the conference, how do we move on up and remain relevant and embrace all of those themes that I mentioned? Well, environmental concerns mean that we'll take a leading role in urban development, and as part of that, we'll have to get used to more political attention. Certainly a few years ago, we always lamented the fact that the rail industry seemed to get a lot of attention. We didn't get any attention. And there was always a bit of a dichotomy about whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, because if we didn't get any attention, we could just get on with what we like doing, which is running buses. But I think those days are over. If you look at urban economies, concerns over air quality, concerns over carbon emissions, and that 60% figure that politicians realise that people are concerned by that, there will be more and more involvement in the way that we run our networks, whether that is through franchising or deep partnership working or just the need to be kept informed. That is definitely going to be there. It's here to stay. Physical accessibility to the network will be even more critical. Obviously, there's been loads of stuff done over the years in terms of bus stops, castle curbing, making sure there's level boarding, level access, bus design as well. So now, obviously, if you run a local bus in the UK, it has to be low floor access. But I think it will need to be pushed even more. We need to think even more about what sort of things we can do in terms of bus design, because that statistic about the increasing number of grey people, to use the term, will be there in the population, and interaction also with the built environment. So it's not just the bus stop itself, but then how that access from the bus stop to other locations in the area and around is affected. So much of what we've done so far ends at the bus stop and the bus shelter, but we just need to think about that a bit more. Our networks and the retailing of them need to be more dynamic and adaptable to remain relevant to individual choice. So that's a response to the point about the artificial intelligence and the digital age. And we need to be comfortable with the use of large data sets to help us to remain relevant in that sense and respond to what our customers will expect and what they see when they're dealing with other retail trades. My absolute bugbear on this one that I've mentioned many a times, those of you that are on sort of CPT, DFT calls, is this crazy thing where we have to give this false notification, 70 days notice of change of service. Maybe that is still relevant if a service is being withdrawn, but 2 or 3 years in the future, our relevance will be absolutely diminished if we need to change our market approach and our network approach, and there's just some false barrier put in our place which requires us to give 70 days notice. Our customers will expect us to change as quickly as what happens in other retail sectors, such as dynamic pricing, network changes almost immediately. That's what people expect now, and we've just got to change that. It's an anachronism that came about when, in the mid-1980s, we had printed timetables and printed leaflets, and we had to get them to the locations and bus stops. It's just crazy. Anyway, rant over. Value for money. Transport authorities are becoming increasingly interventionist for the reasons that I mentioned before, but continuing austerity means that innovation will be the only way that objectives can be met, and that's innovation from us. So what I mean by that, as the demands of transport authorities become, as I say, more interventionist, wanting to be more involved in the supply and the delivery of bus services, there'll be a demand for improvement, continuous improvement, but with the same amount of money, and we will have to respond to that. I'm sure some of you that have been involved in the Manchester tendering process have experienced that already, where the specification is looking quite rightly for high levels of service, but looking for really good value. And as it seems that more transport authorities are going to go along that route, that will be seen in the invitations to tender even more. Access to increasing levels of immigration should be seen as a good thing, because that will allow us to meet our growth aspirations. Certainly in Go-Ahead, one of our key barriers to recovering out of the pandemic has just been availability of staff. Really pleased that we've now got the colleagues that we need to feed the growth that we've got, but that has been an issue. But we should see the level of migration into our country as a positive, so that it means that we can develop our networks in the way that we want to, because there is that demand for them. And authenticity, that whole point about the situation with having a more sort of emotional response to society, we need to show that we've got a human side to interact with the communities that we serve. So, what conclusions can be drawn from this look into the past and the future? So what I would say is that the industry is remarkably resilient and has adapted really well to socio-economic trends. So I've taken you through these 3 ages of deregulation, looking into the future, looked at what was going on just before those 3 ages of deregulation, and hopefully I've made out a case that as an industry, we are incredibly resilient and adaptable, which is something to be commended. Therefore, rumours of our demise have been greatly exaggerated. And in fact, if we embrace the future, we could be on the cusp of a new golden age. There you go, nice positive thing to start the day off with. But there's no room for complacency. So much talk about the future of the industry is all about control and regulation, which is very, very inward-looking for those people that aren't actually inside the industry like all of us. What's more important is whoever is in control embraces the outside factors around us. Hopefully I've shown that the success that we've had as an industry has been from us not being too insular. And we need to make sure that when we have that debate about who controls the networks, who's in charge, who regulates, we don't lose sight of the fact that the people out there are our customers, they're in a wider society, and we need to be part of that community. And that has been our strength in the past and something we need to keep on embracing in the future. And so what could the next age of deregulation be? Well, it could be, if you take my optimistic view, the age of prominence. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. That was a really succinct summary of the way the industry's changed, certainly in my lifetime, and I'm sure in many of the people in this room. And your message seems to be, it is a resilient industry that can adapt and can change, and it's nice to see you're very upbeat about that. Do you see more mayors following Mayor Burnham? I mean, obviously Liverpool are in the process of looking at this. Do you see all this becoming the blueprint for areas that have city mayors?
It does seem to be that way. I mean, I think obviously it's happening in Manchester now. There's a market session in Liverpool next week that I'm sure many people will be going to, because it looks like Liverpool City Region will be kicking off their process towards the end of this year. And I think it's an inevitable output of this whole devolution issue that I was mentioning, that there was a view that quite clearly there's a problem with too much economic activity in the south and not enough in the north. The creation of mayoral authorities in the north. And it's quite clear when you speak to mayors and you listen to mayors that they see buses as a sort of integral part of their whole approach to looking to grow the economies in the areas that they serve. So I think it will be something that we will see more of. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Just wondering what the mood is in the room. Do you share Martin's optimism? Do you have concerns? I mean, anybody want to contribute anything to what's been said, or raise their own questions, or argue against what he said, or anything, really? Yes, hello. I'll hold it for you.
Thank you. Sarah Boyd from Lothian Buses. Martin, you talked about the control and that being both an opportunity, I guess, and a challenge. For those who are on the inside of the industry, what do you think needs to be done to make sure that there is that looking outside that you talked about being needed?
Well, I think it's probably as simple as just making sure that when we discuss things like just sort of Dave's point that just made now about is there going to be more franchising? Inevitably, yes, but all of us, transport authorities, operators, planners, we just need to make sure that we always focus on what we're trying to do, which is get people from A to B in the way that's the most efficient for them, and that's just I just guess my concern slightly is that in all of this sort of discussion about that, we just lose a bit of focus. Hopefully, as I've demonstrated, we generally have embraced the change around us, and we've just got to keep on doing that.
It was interesting you said at the start of this about way back the industry was saying the politicians don't pay any attention to us. Now they do, and it can be a double-edged sword. But do you think that this industry is fairly well up there so far as politicians are concerned when they're thinking about their strategies, their planning, and what appeals to the voters, basically, what they're interested in?
Yeah, I think it's become more so, and I think it's really interesting that Labour seem to have focused a lot on buses, And my guess on that is that they see the whole sort of issue around buses as a key levelling up point, and would argue that the failure, from their point of view, of the Conservatives to deliver on levelling up, and they will use buses as a key element of that. I mean, there's all sorts of arguments that David Leader espouses about whether it's fair to say everything's wonderful in the south and it's not so good in the north, but quite clearly that is an attack mode that they're going to use. And when you look at the Uxbridge by-election, and the Conservatives then used transport as a way to get an unexpected victory, I think transport will become a more prominent issue than it has been in recent general elections, which has to be a good thing.
Especially as it's obviously so now intrinsically linked with the whole environmental debate that's going on currently. Anybody else got anything? Yes.
Thank you. Martin, that was fascinating, but where do you think the whole debate that you've touched on will sit with the big issue of road space allocation and war on the motorist, and the fear of politicians of doing anything that is seen to harm the ability of people to drive their cars wherever they like, whenever they like? Is that something that will evolve with these other factors you talked about, or is it going to remain a problem for us for foreseeable?
It's a really good point, Bill, because it does seem a bit counterintuitive that people are apparently concerned about the environment, but then some politicians are scared to restrict freedom. So I think at some stage there will be a tipping point, and that's why I talk about the a new age of opportunity, because I do see at some stage that there will be a need to address that dichotomy where everybody is concerned about the environment, but everybody wants to go on holidays and everyone wants to drive cars. And of course that whole driving cars thing was really brought into focus with that unexpected Uxbridge by-election victory. And the Tories, have been sort of floundering around to find anything to give them some sort of chance of electoral success. And, it does seem that they've tapped a bit of a rich vein there. So I think in the very, very short term, it's going to be quite difficult. But I think the trend over the longer term has to be that, particularly in terms of urban environments, that use of shared road space needs to be considered much more in a much more planned way. Interesting, one thing for me that I think is maybe even more important than shared road space is just trying to get lane rental in place. This is another sort of tactical point, but the whole roadworks issue has just gone crazy since the pandemic. The amount of temporary roadworks and just seems to be unregulated application of that, I think, causes a lot of delay on our network, much more so than that whole sort of point about bus priority, to be honest. Anyway, another slight rant.
I'm just interested, you're hinting there that it's utility companies and people not coordinating digging the roads up, or is it more that the roads are crumbling and you don't need to, you go anywhere now and the roads seem to be absolutely full of potholes and crumbling surface?
Well, I think I've gone from sort of strategic to the tactical now, but now I'm onto it, I'll stay. It's a good point, Dave, but I think whatever it is, it has to be planned. Where I live, there's a local bus route, and I would say probably in the last 2 years, probably only about 6 months of those 2 years, and I'm not exaggerating, it's been able to go on its normal line of route because there's been temporary roadworks. Again, another one appeared at the weekend where there was a manhole cover. Sorry, this is getting really tactical. A manhole cover that had collapsed or something. There was single shuttle working, which caused a delay for the whole weekend. Must have been horrendous for the bus route. And it was only on Monday that somebody came and just sorted it out. It was like a half an hour job. But there's no incentive on the utilities to get these jobs done quickly. So they just they work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. So if you compare it with the railways, where there's lots of issues that the railways have got, but when they need to sort out their highway, they do it out of hours. For our highway network, we do it 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and everyone just goes home for the weekend. It's crazy, absolutely crazy.
On that note, we'll say thanks very much indeed, Martin. Really interesting talk and an insight there. Thank you very much indeed, Martin Dean, ladies and gentlemen.